Welcome to the Science to People podcast, where we turn cutting-edge health and science insights into information that's discoverable, understandable, and actionable. I'm your host, Brinleigh Murphy-Reuter. Gut health is everywhere right now, from yogurt commercials with added probiotics to TikTok detox teas to at-home microbiome tests that promise to change your mood, your weight, and your life with custom pre- and probiotics. It's become one of the buzziest health topics on the internet. But what's actually backed by science and what's just clever marketing? To help us cut through the hype, I'm joined by Dr. Kristen Panthagani. She's a physician scientist and the voice behind You Can Know Things, where she unpacks medical rumors and falsehoods and makes complex science feel clear and calm. Today, we're talking about the microbiome, what it is, what it isn't, and how to make more informed choices about your health when you're swimming in claims about your gut. So let's get into it. Dr. Panthagani, welcome to the Science to People podcast. Dr. Kristen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I normally start these recordings with this coffee shop chat because I think that it's really important to hear from somebody with a MD and a PhD in your own language what you do. So tell me, if we're in line at a coffee shop, I turn to you and I say, hey, what do you do? What are you up to? What would you say?
So I feel like I have two jobs, and my day job and sometimes night job is I'm an emergency medicine resident. Right now I'm at Yale, just about to finish residency and start my fellowship. So that's my real job. But my night job, sometimes day job, depending on when my shifts are, is I run a website called You Can Know Things. I started it at the beginning of the pandemic, and it aims to explain, at the time, the science of the pandemic in a way that everyone can understand. But obviously now there's a whole lot more to talk about beyond COVID. So I consider myself a science communicator, and that's what led me here today.
So today, you're going to communicate some science with me about a topic that you actually did your PhD on. So we're going to talk specifically about the ever hot topic of the gut microbiome, which I'm saying as a joke, but literally the gut microbiome is everywhere. It is all over millennial Instagram and probably Gen Z Instagram, although I'm not a Gen Z Instagrammer, obviously. Well, maybe not. But it's what you studied for your PhD. So I thought, despite your expertise in emergency medicine and all these other areas, that because of the great work that you do breaking down kind of complex topics, that you might be the right person to help me navigate this world of gut health online.
Absolutely. Yeah. You said I did my PhD. That's what I was working on when COVID hit. And I studied the human microbiome. My thesis project actually looked at the connection between the gut microbiome and other parts of the microbiome and people who are impacted by Hurricane Harvey. I love to talk about the microbiome, in particular, microbiome myths, because there are so many of them. So yeah, let it rip. What are your questions?
Well, I think my first question might be because you just said the gut microbiome and then you kind of generalized microbiome. So I thought only the gut had a microbiome, but I think we might need even to take a step back. What is the microbiome? How would you explain it?
Yeah, so a microbiome is a community of microorganisms. So the microorganisms can be bacteria, which is what we usually think about in the human context, because that's what most of our gut microbiome is bacteria. But it can also be like fungi, viruses. And you're right, there's more than just the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome is the one that gets all the attention. It's the one where most of our bacteria live. And it's probably studied the most, but there's microorganisms on your skin, in your mouth, in your nose. There's a vaginal microbiome. Let's see what else is there. There's debated microbiomes. Some people brain microbiome, and that was hotly debated. And personally, I'm not convinced. Yes, there's lots of controversy in the microbiome world. But putting it simply, it's microbiomes, any just community of microorganisms that lives in a particular place.
Okay. Community of organisms that lives in a particular place in my body. How did this become a dominant wellness trend, this community of organisms? Like, what is driving the public's obsession with gut health?
Yeah. So I think how it happened is back in like the early 2000s, there was a kind of a advancement in technology in the way that we were able to study these organisms. So it used to be that if you wanted to study them, you had to actually grow the bacteria, but there's like trillions of bacteria like in the gut, and a lot of them are very tricky to grow. They have like very particular conditions that they want in the lab, and we didn't know how to grow them, so we didn't can't study them if we can't grow them. And then there was the development of this new technology based on sequencing the DNA, that all of a sudden we didn't have to grow them anymore, and all we had to do was take a stool sample and extract the DNA and sequence it, and we could get a pretty good estimate of which bacteria were there. So once that technology took off, it all of a sudden became very easy to study. And so everybody wanted to study it. So there was an explosion in these microbiome studies. And everyone's like, oh, this is super important, which it is. We'll get to that in a second. Microbiome is super important and plays a ton of, vital functions in our health. But it became this like hot science trend to be like, oh, let's see if my disease is connected to the microbiome. And so explosion of studies and papers saying the microbiome is connected to this and connected to this and connected to this. But there were all these kind of association studies. And it turns out studying the microbiome well is actually quite hard. There's a lot of variation by how the samples were collected, what methods you used. So a lot of those studies that are just the simple like association, like, hey, we looked in this group of people that had this particular disease and they had this one bacteria, therefore the microbiome is probably connected to the disease. Those turned out to, many of them didn't particularly pan out, but that made it like kind of explode in our public consciousness. And then all of a sudden there was all these new ways to market things about the microbiome because it seemed so important to our health. Which I think we can talk about more about like prebiotics and probiotics. But that's my perspective of how this kind of went a little bit crazy.
It is fascinating to think like the ease of being able to study something can then trigger this massive commercialization for the public into the results of that ease of studying. And okay, so on that note, like I went through a phase where I was really into my microbiome. It's about last year when that Netflix documentary came out about gut health and the microbiome. And in it, they recommended like eating 20 something different unique fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds every week to like get this real diversity. And I had a list on my iPhone, like of everything that I ate. I broke down so that I could get credit for it and was really into it. And of course, like interestingly enough, on this documentary, they were referencing a microbiome test kit where you could see what the health of your microbiome was. They'd never named it, but they showed the box getting delivered at some point. And so I
So
paused.
wait, like with the label on it, like you'd see which brand it was?
Yes, but
Okay.
they never said it out loud. And so I paused the documentary, like went up to my TV, kind of looked at it, figured out the name of the company, and like found the test kit online. I didn't end up doing it because it was expensive, but as I think I'd really love to get into, that like personalized poop tests, prebiotics, probiotics, of which I have bottles of both in my house, kombucha, kefir, yogurt, with added probiotics, which seems redundant. What are all these things? And do any actually work? Where should I spend my money?
So I was actually glad to hear the first thing that you started off with was that you were aiming to get a diversity of plants in your diet. And so this whole world of like prebiotics, probiotics, all this can get very overwhelming, especially with people trying to sell you stuff. And they'll say, no, my product's the best. My product's the best. And of course, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there if they're trying to pitch it to you and they're the one making money off of it. So the simplest advice that I have is for the average person, there might be exceptions for people who have specific diseases, but for the average person, the thing that is the best thing you can do for your gut health is get a variety of plants in your diet and fiber. That's the thing that your microbiome absolutely loves, because what you eat, your microbiome eats. If you have a diversity of fiber, then it's going to help those beneficial bacteria grow and proliferate. And that's what you want, and that links into your metabolic health, it links into your immunological health, and that's really in my like, that's what I do. So, as far as, or at least I should say I try to do. But in terms of the prebiotics and probiotic supplements, so probiotics are bacteria that you can eat, and prebiotics are essentially the food for the bacteria that can be broken down into molecules that help your gut potentially. However, yes. But plants are prebiotics. And this is the thing that drives me crazy about, like, the industry behind it, is they think they're packaging these fancy prebiotics like they're this special thing that you can't get anywhere else, but plants are the OG prebiotics. Like, that is what your bacteria want, and that's really all you need is enough fiber and plants in your diet. So if you have that, then there's not a huge need to go buy this expensive prebiotic supplement or buy the soda that has a little bit of prebiotic in it. If you want to, is it going to hurt you? Probably not. Maybe in some particular GI diseases, it may actually make things worse. But I think it's just become this like wellness marketing thing to convince people they need it. And in reality, like you just need plain for the vast majority of people.
Now, what about the tests? Because
Yeah.
I am super obsessed with tests.
So the thing about the test is they only provide a small snapshot of your gut microbiome, which can fluctuate based on what you ate yesterday, based on what type of sample you got. And they're pretty hard for an individual to interpret. And so that's my main, like, it probably will do some sequencing protocol and give you some estimate of what bacteria are there. The question is then what do you do with that information? And if you're it's pure curiosity, like, I'm just really curious to see which bacteria are there and that satisfies you, I think that's fine then. But if you're getting that information and then trying to make decisions about your diet, like, that's where it kind of falls apart, is like, what do you actually do with it?
Okay. Yeah. And that's what we see a lot with consumers trying to leverage science is that so what is lost a little bit. 'Cause what I've learned through a lot of these conversations is that the science is sciencing. It kind of is meant to stay in a lot of ways within science. It's not always meant to get to people.
Yeah, a lot of the microbiome data is still quite messy, and we're still sorting things out and don't always have the just easy conclusions of here's what you do with it.
Yeah, and a lot of those tests, I think, ultimately culminate in some sort of personalized pre-probiotic that they're going to send you, which is to the tune of hundreds of dollars a month. So it sounds like that might not be necessary if you just eat a balanced diet, which recognizing that not all people have access to balanced diets, depending on where they live or what's available to them for various reasons. But that being said, if they're struggling to have a balanced diet with food, affording really expensive personalized pre and probiotics is probably out of
And then going this step further, the thing that irks me a little bit about these is this: it's almost telling people, like, that if they don't do this, if they don't take this supplement, then they're somehow harming their health. And that's just from the very basic advice of just if you're able to get enough dietary fiber, then you're gonna do great. And so I guess in that sense, it does do a little bit of harm, and that it's kind of confusing people about what they need to do to be healthy.
like understanding that the base is just like get a very plant fiber based diet. Is there anything else that can help boost the health of somebody's microbiome? Or are there any clear symptoms of having an unbalanced microbiome that the average person might experience?
That's a great question. There's definitely medical situations, but this gets, I think, a little bit beyond your question of like kind of for the average person. But there's definitely medical situations that we know are caused by a very disrupted microbiome. So one example is when people, especially elderly people, are exposed to antibiotics over and over again. They can develop an infection called C. diff, and that's when what basically happens is the balance of the microbiome is wiped out a little bit, the diversity goes down, and then this one bacteria takes over, the bacteria C. diff, and it gives them really, really bad diarrhea to the point that it can be dangerous and kill them. So that one of the early successes of the microbiome field was giving what's called fecal microbiota transplants, which is basically a poop transplant in a very carefully screened, medically controlled environment. I will put that caveat in there because people started trying to do these at home, which I do not recommend at all.
Oh my God.
And that was for refractory cases where the treatment or old treatments weren't working. It was it worked super, super well.
Yeah.
So there definitely are medical situations where addressing lack of diversity in the microbiome is important. As far as kind of the general advice of oh, look out for these symptoms as a sign of a dysfunctional microbiome, the challenge there is symptoms can potentially overlap with so many other causes that I'm hesitant to just give a list and say this is this, like diarrhea. Theoretically, yes, but diarrhea can be caused by a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Um, so, so if you're, I guess this is going to be the boring advice, but if you're having specific symptoms you're concerned about, talking, especially gut symptoms, talking to a GI doctor is going to be your best bet.
Right, right. No, that I think that makes sense. I've heard two people kind of by proxy that have gotten poop transplants for various things. And one of them reported that they no longer have hangover symptoms.
Interesting.
And that wasn't what they got the poop transplant to fix. Obviously, nobody would do that for them. But that was one of the things that changed.
Weird.
Yeah. And apparently, the person that they got the poop from never suffered from hangover symptoms.
Interesting.
And then when they transplanted the poop, the new person never had hangover symptoms. So I'll just leave that with you.
I mean, you could come up with some plausible potential mechanism of why that happens, but that's crazy.
Isn't that wild? I know.
Very, very interesting.
Speaking of rumors that people like me spread on social media, what do you think makes this space, like gut health, particularly vulnerable to rumors, falsehoods, or kind of this commercialization for profit?
Yeah.
Or is it particularly vulnerable? Or do you think all science is up for grabs right now?
I think it's fair to say this space is particularly vulnerable. I think that it's a couple things. One is that kind of explosion in studies that showed correlations really fit this particular narrative of your microbiome is connected to everything. So that, and then anything we just talked about, it's oh, maybe it is. You can postulate that it's connected to just about anything that wins people's imagination. And then it is really an important vital system in our health, and it really is connected to a ton of things that we're still working to figure out, but our metabolic health, our immunological health. But where the line between real and speculation starts and ends is often difficult for the average person to figure out. So that's part of it. And then also the things that have been kind of marketed as gut health problems are fatigue and bloating and diarrhea, all these things that are just so common and can be caused by so many different things. So almost anyone in the US right now, if you ask them if they're tired, the answer is probably going to be yes for most of us. And so it just makes it this rarely easy in of hey, well, you have one of the symptoms, and hey, this thing is connected to so many things, and hey, here's maybe a solution. Which that formula is applied, that marketing formula is applied to lots of different areas besides gut health. But I think it is kind of particularly prone because it is potentially so far reaching in the impacts on our health, but then also still not fully understood.
So how would you advise people? And through your work at You Can Know Things, how do you advise people to try to parse this out themselves? I walked down the aisle at a pharmacy, and any aisle at a pharmacy, there's so many products about gut health.
Yeah, it's tough. So my just basic, if you want a one size fits all advice for this is to not worry if you're an average person that doesn't have a particular disease associated with the gut where you're getting particular advice from your doctor, is to not worry too much about finding the perfect supplement or the perfect probiotic or the perfect prebiotic, and to focus on your diet. And I know that's like the old boring advice, but I think it's the best advice. And then that helps kind of this challenge you're talking about of like you're having all these marketing messages thrown at you and you're trying to sort between them and figure out which one's real. And just in this case, going back to nature and saying, well, actually, bodies have been feeding the gut microbiota for millennia is through plants. They didn't have supplements. They didn't have probiotics in a capsule. They had lots of plants, and that worked very well. And so I think that's really the basic advice people need.
So on that note, it makes me think, because in the momosphere, my community of moms, a lot of people are worried about all the antibiotics that our kids are getting. And I have an ear infection kid. He had back to back to back to back to back ear infections until we finally were able to get ear tubes put in. And I got pretty worried about the state of his microbiome, his gut microbiome, getting just completely obliterated by all of these antibiotics. I mean, at one point, I think he had like 6 ear infections in a year with subsequent antibiotics of different types to treat that. And there's obviously antibiotic resistance and other things, but a lot of parents are talking about this, the health of their kids' microbiomes, and understanding that you're not here to diagnose my son, but to think about how parents should navigate this, because I can feed myself 25 different fruits and vegetables in a week, but a toddler is a whole different ballgame. Dude likes sliced cucumbers and avocado, and once in a while will tolerate a broccoli or the tip of an asparagus, which is very unique. So I was a bottom asparagus gal and he's a top asparagus guy.
That works out nicely for you.
Yes, it does. Exactly. We still split them. But that's 4 or vegetables. And then, I mean, the fruit is like, he'll have 2 raspberries at breakfast and we're done. Maybe half a banana. I guess the overarching question is like, does childhood microbiome health carry through to adulthood? Or is it something that regenerates once you get your diet squared up? And if it doesn't regenerate, how do we ensure healthy microbiome in our children? Especially if we're doing things medically that might be putting their gut microbiome at risk. Again, assuming that you're not giving personalized medical advice. I'm just using my son as an illustrative example.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So the microbiome develops rapidly between about ages 0 and 3. And you can see differences early on based on whether the kids are breastfed, when solid foods are introduced, what kind of environment they grew up in, if they're in like daycare, things like that. Now, every time I say we can see differences, that doesn't necessarily mean those differences are a problem or good. So a lot of the early research is we're just looking for like, oh, it's different in this group, but then we want to assume that like what that difference means, like, oh, that's like actually matters, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily actually matter. But from what I've seen in the literature, so let's break this down. There's a whole bunch of different things that can influence how kids' microbiomes develop. One of them, a big one, is their exposure to what we call like microbe-rich environments. And so these are things like farms and like pets are two big ones that have shown up in the literature of potentially being connected to reduced risk of allergic disease down the road. So that's one thing to realize, that just because your kid is getting antibiotics, like, yes, the antibiotics are probably going to kill some of the bacteria. It's not like a course or even multiple courses of the amoxicillin that your kid got for ear infections are going to like completely empty out their gut. Thankfully, not that sensitive. But then also remember that your child's being exposed to microbes as well. So there's still like sort of an input in the equation. And then as far as the diet thing, first of all, props to you for that. That's actually pretty good. So it's not just fruits and vegetables, also grains can contain fiber.
His main grain intake is blueberry toaster waffles and white rice or mac and cheese. So those are our quote unquote grains, but I think those might just more be starch.
So I wouldn't stress out too much that these courses of antibiotics are going to like 100% wipe out and screw up his microbiome for life. There are some of the data on probiotics that actually is promising is antibiotic associated diarrhea. So if that's something that he's having, then that's something to potentially talk to his pediatrician about. But the other thing that when I think about antibiotics in the microbiome is antibiotics, even if it's multiple courses, are still for a relatively short duration, right? So like usually it's like like 7 to 10 days. And then if it's multiple courses, let's say it's like up to 3 months of antibiotics. Like that's not nothing. But then if you think about the course of your child eating, it's every single day. So there's the chance of that microbiome kind of regrowing if it's getting that good prebiotic food, which it actually sounds like you're doing a pretty good job of. I don't want to say it's not going to do anything. Like it's potential that the repeated antibiotics exposures could have some impact, but it's only one piece of the microbiome puzzle. The other piece is diet. Another piece is there pets in the home. Another piece is, are they exposed to microbes over here? And so it's not like you're ruining your child's microbiome by giving them antibiotics.
Just added to the list of things that I'm potentially ruining for my child. Well, that's good to know. And then I guess the second piece of that question was, is it regenerative? So if it's been wiped out, say it is wiped out in childhood because my kid only eats toaster waffles and won't eat anything else, and we have no pets or whatever, which isn't the case for us, but it could be for other people. One of my cousins only ate toaster waffles for like the first 5 years of her life. So say that's the case. Once they reach adulthood, is there a chance to bring their microbiome up to better health by improving their diet?
Yeah. So I'll start with that question is I don't think we 100% have an answer to.
Fair enough.
So there is a potential that so the microbiome influences the development of the immune system. And it's possible that if there's kind of, an immature microbiome early on, that could influence the immune system early on in a way that wouldn't necessarily be correctable later. I'm saying this sort of speculatively. I don't have a firm answer for you. But that being said, the second part of your question is like, can you fix your microbiome? And so if you're exposed to the sort of good bacteria and you're feeding the good bacteria, then you can definitely change your microbiome, particularly with diet. So it's not like if you mess up your microbiome at age 2, then you're stuck with it for life. Again, I know I'm saying that I'm like a broken record, but diet is the thing that like really, really drives what is going on in your gut. And so if you dramatically and healthfully change your diet once you're 18, that's going to have a really positive impact on your microbiome.
Great. Well, that's good news. That's really good news. Interesting. And so what I'm wondering is, with knowing that we have kind of all these correlations and a lot of gray area in this science, what do you hope in the next 5 years we see in this research, and then how that research or insights might carry over to the public?
Yeah. So I think the thing that practically would be really useful for the public is data on like specific types of foods that they can eat to bolster their microbiome diversity. I think the main thing that really needs to happen is better translation of what we already know about diet and to the public. Because like you've been saying, like the wellness world has kind of taken over this space in terms of the public's minds of like, you need all these products and you need all this testing. But we do actually already have good data about the impact of diet. That data doesn't get blasted as loud as all this other stuff. So that's the transition I like to see. So it's actually not even so much a transition of like we need more research. It's just a transition of translating what we already know into the public world a little bit.
I actually have an orange on my desk right now to help diversify my own diet today because I'm not a big citrus eater. But I did just read a study in Harvard Magazine about mental health and nurses and their consumption of citrus. Yeah, so that was interesting. Something else to look into. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This was incredibly useful. I think we covered personal concerns, commercial concerns, parenting woes, and most effective ways to navigate gut microbiome health, which, in case you didn't listen to a single word of this episode, is basically just eat lots of different foods, especially different fibers.
Yes. Eat lots of plants.
Eat lots of plants. We should get t-shirts.
Yes. Microbiome wants plants.
Microbiome wants plants. I love it. That was Dr. Kristen Panthagani, physician, scientist, and trusted guide through the fog of online health claims, especially microbiome. You can follow her work at youcanknowthings.com, where she takes on everything from vaccine myths to fertility supplements with clarity and curiosity. If this episode helped you think differently about the microbiome, or gave you a little more confidence in spotting hype in that pharmacy aisle, share it with a friend. You can also find more episodes and show notes on Substack and Spotify. And don't forget to tune in next week for our final conversation with Dr. Jessica Steyer. Hopefully, it can make science feel a little more human, a little more practical, and a lot more clear. Thank you.